Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I trust everyone is safe and well. Welcome to this week's Open Classroom webinar, number 49 in the series which we began at the beginning of our local lockdown. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be shifting the focus of our webinar's contents to the new functionality included in the next version of Civil Designer, version 8.4, which will be released on Monday, the 3rd of August. As per our previous webinars, we're going to be joined today by Christopher Smith, Andrew Cole, and Cameron Boyle, all the regulars, who will be covering the modules listed on your screens right now, starting today with Chris. To all our first-time attendees today, which makes up a rather large number, please note that all our past webinars, 48 of them, can be found on our website on the FAQ page, which is found on the Services pull-down menu. As always, please feel free to use the text chat service on your GoToWebinar app to ask us any questions you may have during the various presentations. So, good afternoon, Chris, and please take it away.
Thanks, Charles, and welcome everybody to this webinar where today we're going to be looking at sewer and water house connections and how to connect them automatically in Civil Designer 8.4. To start off, we need to create parcels. So we'll have a look at how to create parcels, and then we'll go through to creating sewer and water house connections or property connections. We'll need to be in survey mode, and then we can go through to parcels, and we can either add them graphically or select them from the stand numbers. So you'll see if you zoom in here, you'll see I've got the property boundaries sitting in one CAD layer called cadastral boundaries, and I have the property stand numbers sitting in a different layer, which I have called stand numbers. I can then go to parcels, and I can choose to create them from stand numbers. I'll then choose the CAD layer holding the stand numbers. I'll choose a search radius of 500, and I'll choose the maximum area for the parcels to be 5,000 square meters. We'll use a tolerance in millimeters of 50 mils, and we'll draw the parcels while processing. There you can see it's done 5,117 parcels. There were 27 parcels that were rejected because they were too large, and the duration is taken 17,000 milliseconds. Now, the reason it rejected some of them being for too large is because your house connections or your property connections need a little bit more thought to be able to drain a larger size property. Take, for instance, a school, for instance, where on one side you may have ablution facilities, another side you may have sports facilities. You would need to be able to drain the whole property. We can then press OK. Once your parcels are created, you can go through to the display settings, and you can choose to switch on or off the parcels as well as change their border and fill pen colors. You can choose the transparency. You can choose to display the property number should you wish, and we'll get onto the other categories a bit later. If I select a parcel, you'll also see in the properties there's a number of items which can be categorized. That's completely up to you. While there are a number of items that can be categorized here, Civil Designer will only categorize the items pertaining to the house connections for the sewer and the water. Parcels are recognized in other geospatial programs, so we can export the parcels if we go to File, Export, Export LAN XML. We choose to export the parcels. Let's not negate at this stage. The negation is for when you're taking it out to software that does not know what a southern hemisphere is. Now that I have exported it, I can go to Parcels, Remove All. I can re-import it just to show you how to re-import parcels. Perhaps it's been done by other professionals and you would just like to import it. Now that we have our parcels inside Civil Designer, we can do the sewer and water house connections. Let's go and place the sewer network on. With the sewer network on, we can now go and do our automatic house connections. First off, I'd like to go to the sewer mode and go to Edit, Design Parameters. I will make sure that the dynamic flow update is switched on. This will ensure that inflows from the properties will be assigned to each property connection. I will then go to the earth connections and check earth connection defaults. I'm going to ensure that each connection is 1 unit, and I'm going to use a inflow class of low income per connection. I'll choose to calculate the minimum ground on each property. I can then go to earth connections, create automatically. I'll indicate the layer which holds the parcels. I'll use a side offset of 1.15. The maximum connection length is the smaller of either 50 meters into the property or 80% of the parcel's depth. So that's up to you to choose. You could choose to drain the whole property, or you could choose to only drain up to 20 meters into the property. You could choose to keep the existing, and you could choose to color the parcels based on the boundary precision while processing. Here again, we can look at the default items for the property connections. I encourage you to press F1 and go through each value if you are unsure of any values here. You'll see that we have the connections values for when in the road reserve. We also have the values for when the property connection is connecting to the mid block when it is inside its property or when it is an adjacent property. We can press OK, and we can look at the DTM surface to process. We're going to process the surface number 1. We'll set these to none, and we'll press OK. We can then press start. So you'll see 3 different colors there. The one is for when it's in the road reserve, when it's for a mid block that is running inside its property, when it's a mid block running outside its property, and you will see the red for when it hasn't made a connection to that property. Those are the ones that are flagged that you need to investigate and see how you can manually resolve those issues. You can see that this is going to save you a lot of time because there'll only be a few items which you'll manually have to check. So here you can see 4,993 parcels were connected to the sewer network. 124 parcels were not connected. Let's get a list of these. I'd like to just click on the display settings. I'm just going to turn off the minimum ground level on the property and press OK, just to make it a bit clearer. We can go to each property and view it. Here you can see this property hasn't been connected to the connection, and you can do the manual connections to these properties. So we can go to your defaults. This one happens to be sitting inside earth or inside property, depending on which language pack you have installed. I can then select to add the property connection. and the connection is made now. You need to go through each one and check that they are then connected. Once you have completed that, you can press close. With the parcels, you can see your connection types. And that's what we're currently displaying. Let's put that back to default. Let's turn the display for the sewer network off, and we'll turn the display for the water network on. And let's do the water connections. So we'll go to water. Before we do the water connections, I just want to go to settings, connection defaults, and see that we're going to do the CSIR low value. I'm happy with the rest of the information. And I can run to connections, create automatically. We'll use the CivDes parcel again. We'll use a maximum length of 25 meters, a tolerance of 100 mils. You can choose to keep the existing should you wish. We'll then use the front offset of 500 millimeters, the side offset of 800 millimeters. And our order of preference will be to look for the short doubles, then the long doubles, the short singles, and the long single. We'll color the parcels based on the connection types while processing. Again, you can look at your defaults. I'm setting it to low, and I'll start. So here it's doing the short doubles first. It's now processing the long doubles and the rest. So there you can see 5,116 parcels have been connected to the network. One parcel could not be connected. We've got 1,400 short double connections, 1,000 long double connections, about 100 short single connections, and 70 long single connections. It'll ask us if we want to see the list of the connections that could not be made. We'll say yes, and we'll click show. Here you can see there's no availability to put a connection in, so I can go and say graphically draw. I can say draw freehand, and I'll put in a connection along this route here. Just press X again to be perpendicular. And quit. Once again, under the parcels, you'll see that you can do your water connection type. So we've got no connection, short double, long double, short single, and long single. You'll also see under your analysis, connection quantities. These items will be populated as well. As well as under data summary, you will immediately get your demand values as well because we set that to CSIR low. You'll now need to go and do the bigger properties and find where the best location will be to manually add those property connections. That brings up all the time I have for today. I hope this was informative to you, and I hope this will save you time and be beneficial to you. Have a great day further. Back to you, Charles.
Thank you, Chris. That was great. We're now going to be handing over to Andrew Cole, who will be covering new 8.4 functionality included in his survey and terrain module. Andrew, please take it away.
Good day. In today's survey and terrain segment of the webinar, I'm going to be looking at the different shading, so the cut fill shading that has been enhanced in 8.4, Civil Designer 8.4. So looking at this platform, we've got areas in cut and fill, design surface relative to the ground surface. You can see I've switched on the triangulation lines on the original ground surface, and you can see areas that are in cut where the lines are showing, and then the full area would be the area that you don't see the actual break lines from the original ground surface. Okay, so the different shading would be the areas in cut and fill, and then the neutral line between those two areas. We have now enhanced this feature in Civil Designer 8.4. I'm going to be showing you how that new functionality works. So I'm just switching to my pond and platform project that I've been using for the webinars, and I'm looking at the terrain difference surface function. The difference surface function does require a DTM grid to be generated, and the DTM grid is generated using the terrain DTM grid volumes function. So I'm just going to run that. And in this case, it's the ground and design surface, the difference between the two that you need to generate the grid for, between my base earthworks and my platform surface. Just set a grid interval. The smaller the interval, the more accurate your volumes would be. But that interval basically just depends on what function you're using the grid for. For example, in drainage, you might want to interpolate levels closer together, so then probably use a smaller grid interval. Okay, I don't really need the volume calculation done in this case. We're just using the grid for the shading. So I can just run that terrain difference surface function again, and using that current grid file, and then which surface do I want to store this new grid surface to. Just going to use a clear surface with no data on, let's say surface 35, and yes, I want to make it active. Okay, then we get that message that the difference surface has successfully been created between your design and your ground surface. And then it's just a matter of going to display settings to display that difference shading. Okay, you'll notice that there are one or two new settings under the different shading, so we're going to touch on those two new settings today. The third one is the one that has been available up to now. It's just in a different setting. So you've got your fill areas and your cut areas. The positive is the fill and the negative would be your cut areas. You can obviously select which pens you'd like to use for the cut and the fill areas. And you can use the gradient colors as well. Gradient shading. So here you will see the cut and fill area. The cyan would be your cut, and then the orange is the fill portion of that platform. Okay, so let's look at the new different shading functions. So that's the traditional one that was available, and now in 8.4 we've automated the process. So you just have to select a ground and design surface and click on the generate button, and the program then automatically would create that different surface, and you then just get to display the result. So we've built in that automation in 8.4. You can actually swap the two surfaces in that display settings dialog, and based on the triangles of the bottom surface you might get a slightly different result. Okay, so there is a little swap button in that dialog as well. Okay, I'm just switching off some of the road shading, so we're going to try the third new option, or the second option, but it's the third way of doing the different shading at the moment in 8.4. And in this case it's a cut fill shading between your strings, so be it roads or terrain strings, and a specified base surface. So Civil Designer will generate the cut fill shading for this particular function for all the visible and active roads and string platforms in your project. So you just select your base surface and click on the generate button, and Civil Designer would then generate those cut fill shading areas for all the strings, roads, and platforms that you have active in your project. And then you can see the platform has got the cut fill shading as well as the roads. So you can see the cut areas there and your fill areas. Okay, then I'm going to move on to the flood levels functionality. That's a brand new function in Civil Designer 8.4. In this exercise that I'm going to show you, we're actually looking at an existing project where we're looking at positioning your structure above the recorded flood level. So this is an actual project that I'm going to show you in this exercise. I've got the CAD footprint of that building that we're trying to position above the flood line. Okay, so I've just switched the CAD layer on, and then looking at the actual function, it's under terrain, drainage, flood levels. So this is a brand new function in 8.4. You would specify which surface you want to check the flood levels of. You can then specify the actual level, the water surface level. The surface maximum just picks up the highest level on your site and then uses that as your flood level. You can set your depth increments. It's going to calculate your volume of water that's been retained inside that or on your surface. There's quite a few different CAD outputs, but we'll come back to that later. So I'm just going to run the function first. Okay, and you'll see that it hasn't actually been able to do it because it's telling me I need to demagnify or zoom all so that the whole surface is in view when you run the function, as a lot of our functions do work. I'm just going to zoom in to the site and rerun the function again. So it's terrain, drainage, and flood levels. Okay, so I'm just going to run it again at the same settings. And we're essentially, in this case, not outputting anything to CAD, it's just the actual water volume that we're calculating there. So it gives you the volumes for each depth band, and then it gives you the cumulative volumes. So what we did now is similar to the dam volumes function, but for this new flood levels, you don't actually need a depression. You can run it on any surface. So I'm just running it again on that same existing topo surface, and I'm specifying the actual recorded flood level in this case, and then I'm also outputting it to CAD. Couple of options there. You can have a polyline or hatching at the flood level, or you can have a polyline or hatching or solid fill at every depth increment. So I'm just putting in the hatching at the actual flood level, outputting that to a CAD layer that I created. Okay. And you can see we look okay there, but we still need to build in some sort of safety factor. I'm going to try 0.5 meter above the recorded flood level and see what that looks like. So if I run that flood levels, drainage flood levels again, and I'm adding 0.5 meter to the recorded flood level, so making that 61.56, and I'm sending it to that same CAD layer. The program then recognizes that there was something on that layer before. Do I want to clear it? So I say yes, and then it hatches, and you can see at that level we don't have the required elevation for our dwelling, so we're going to have flooding. So what has happened now, we've got an actual surface in this project that has been redesigned to take those flood levels into consideration. So this is my surface 2 that I've now switched on, and I'm just going to run the flood levels now on this redesigned, remodeled new surface, and we can run it on this new ground surface, proposed surface. I'll just run it at the 61.06 at the recorded flood level firstly, and you can see over there everything's fine. We have an exit point at the top there for access to the site, and then if I run it at that 500 mils above the recorded flood level to that same CAD layer, just going to clear that, then we still seem to be okay. The structure still is in the clear. I can maybe just zoom in a little bit so we can see that footprint of the actual building is above that additional 0.5 meter above the flood level. I just want to show you the other options, the other CAD options. So I'm going to open up my control center and make use of the CAD layers tab at the bottom. So I'm just going to pin that open. the control centers so we can switch the layer visibility on and off from the control center. I'm going to run that terrain flood levels, drainage flood levels again, and I'm going to set that down to that 61.06, the actual flood level, and then I'll output just the polyline at that flood level, and I'm putting it onto that specific CAD layer. So I've created this layer previously. So there you can see that flood level, the polyline representing the flood level. Generally, if you refresh, the line would disappear. So I'm just switching it on, switching the visibility on in that layer tab. I'm going to run the flood levels again, and this time we're going to go to the polyline at every depth increment. So at every 100 mils from the lowest level up to our flood level, we want depth increment polylines. Okay, and I'm outputting it to that specific layer again. And there you can see the polylines at every 100 mils that were created. Once again, if you refresh, they will disappear. So I would just need to switch that on, the visibility of that particular layer. I'm just going to hit spacebar just to run the function again, and then I'm going to put in some solid fill at every depth increment. Okay, so you've seen the solid fill at the flood level. In this case, I just want to show you that last option, which is the hatching or solid fill at every depth increment. I'm just going to switch on some contours so you can see exactly what levels we're looking at. But as you can see, this flood levels is a very useful function for flood risk assessments. And that's me for today. Until next time, cheers.
Thank you, Andrew. That was great. We're now going to head over to Cameron for this week's road session covering the new functionality included in version 8.4. Good afternoon, Cameron, and please take it away.
Good afternoon, Charles, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the road session of today's webinar series. For those of you who attended our junction design and verification webinar, you'll recognize this project. Today, I'm excited to show you some of the awesome improvements in the newer 8.4 version made to our junction design and road design settings. If you were to go and select the display settings icon or press F10 on your keyboard, the first thing you'll notice that we've got a draft text option. Previously, we used the terrain draft text over here. So as you can see, in the newer version, the roads modules inherited its own draft text. And because of that, if you were to go to File, Option Settings, you'll see you no longer have to go and specify your text size for your horizontal PI names and warnings. Going back to the display settings. For those of you who are not familiar with the draft text functionality, as an example, if I go to my plan layout and I go and specify my chainage size, clicking on OK and zooming in, that white text will all be in 3 millimeters. And as I use my mouse wheel to zoom in, that 3 millimeters stays constant, irrespective of my zoom in or magnification. If I were to go and turn off the draft text, you can see the text is a lot bigger, and as I zoom out, it becomes smaller. You'll also notice that in 8.4, as I go and select the different roads, the road names option here, these settings are applicable to whichever road you go and select. In 8.3, you had to set up the settings for the individual roads, whereas in 8.4, if I do go and make one change here and apply it to all the roads, you'll see all the roads adopt the same settings. Switching off the road names and applying it to all the roads. If I now go to road strings, I'm looking forward to discussing the textures, but before we do that, I want to explain the new functionality in road junction design. So I'm going to switch on the transparent shading, and I'm going to turn off my height shading. zooming into my junction. I'm going to go and delete this junction for two purposes. Number one, not a lot of software can do it with the ease that Civil Designer can delete a junction. Number two, you can click on numerous places in 8.4, whereas in 8.3 you had to click at specific places. Showing you this, if I go to Junctions, Delete Junction, I can click anywhere in the vicinity of the junction. There's my first example. I'm going to say no, I don't want to delete it. Pressing spacebar on my keyboard, I can click at another spot. So numerous places, and it picks up the junction very easily in 8.4. This time I'm going to go and delete the junction. Let's redesign it. Going back to Junctions, Add Junction, specify the intersecting road and the main road. This looks the same, but if I go and select the left curve option, you will see two new features. The first one, the text style has been updated, which makes it more visible, and then you'll see a preview of what your bow mouth design looks like. If I do go and change, for instance, my center radius, look what happens to the text as well as the bow mouth preview. They dynamically update. If I go back to my radius and select another cell, it then again goes and updates. If I go and select the curve option, you can see the display is being removed, and that is because I've got information that is outstanding. Putting in radius and offset values, straight away you can see the result, and this prevents you from having to go through this process, click on OK, only to find that the result is not quite what you've expected. Taking it a step further, applying a taper option, again you can see how the diagram has been updated. If I turn off the taper, if I turn off the curve, and then changing my radius once again. You can go and put in divider island information and specify which settings to use. If you want detailed junction design information, please look out for our junction design and verification webinar found on our YouTube channel. Selecting the right curve information, you also have the option to pick up the design elements from CAD. Looking at the divider island, if I go and change this option to extract from CAD entities, select the polyline, and when I do this, the preview then is switched off. Click on the island, and now specifying my bow mouth CAD option. If I haven't turned on the CAD layer yet, I can go to my layer display settings, switch on which layer I would like to use, and then indicate it. And once I'm done, I can go and right click and extract string. Looking at the preview, my left curve, right curve, I'm happy with that. And Civil Designer would go through the design process. Remember, you have the option of editing your junctions, as well as looking at the bow mouth editor if you want to view your bow mouth in a long sectional format. I'm going to turn off the transparency of my roads. And zoom into my mini roundabout design. Going to Junctions, Edit Junction. Looking at the crossbar options. In 8.3, we introduced the option of draped. And in a case like that, the roundabout was draped on your main road. In 8.4, we've applied that to the crown as well as the crossfall options. And we've also refined the design methodology. Previously, the design of the roundabout was treated as a double junction, whereas now the roundabout is draped onto the main road, as previously mentioned. One or two parallel strings are then created, depending on which method you use over here. and a grade is applied between the different strings. We've also looked at the triangulation and improved the vertical gradient of our roads. And because of this, even if I were to go and select the crown option for the roundabout, you'll see that the render view gives you a much smoother result. Let's go and view that. If I go and right click, select render view, and changing my perspective. So you can see it's a lot smoother finish than what you got in previous versions. While we're in the 3D view, if I go and right click and select render settings, you have the option of applying textures. Let's look at that in more detail. Changing my viewport, switching on CAD layers for my rendering. And going to my display settings or pressing F10 on my keyboard. Select road strings. If you're familiar with the 8.3 display settings, you'll find that we've got a new tab here called Textures. You now have the option of specifying your own textures, and these textures would then be visible in your render view. If I click on the down arrow, you'll find that we've got 40 textures to go and select from. You can specify different textures for different elements in your road. And these textures would also be applicable to your components. Looking at that, if I go to Tools on top, Component Editor, in 8.3 we gave you the option of 9 textures, so we've also increased that to 40. These textures on the road surface and other road elements are now aligned along the road. Let's take a look at it. Changing my viewport. Remember that these textures are only available if you right-click, select Render Settings, and enable your textures. In 8.4, you will also notice that we give you the option to maximize the render view area. And that would mean even if you've got your output bar open in your design center, your output bar won't be displayed. There you can see the new textures implemented. If you want to make changes, it's easy. We go back to your display settings, road strings, and let's, for instance, make a change to the carriageway. We're doing a golf estate here, so we'd only change the texture to a brick paving. Looking at the different textures, it may be that you want a different texture for your sidewalks, for your compulsory information, for your curbs, the carriageway, using some grass for your median, and then also looking at your cut and fill embankments. My time is up. Be sure to join us next week where I'll be showing you the new very powerful functionality of point control. Until then, cheers for now. Back to you, Charles.
Thank you, Cameron, Andrew, and Chris for your masterclasses today. And thank you very, very much to all of you who attended today. Please remember, if you would like any further information with regards to Civil Designer, please use the email address listed on your screens right now. As I stated earlier, all our past lockdown webinars, 49 of them now, can be found on our website on the FAQ page, which is found under the Services pull-down menu. Once again, thank you very much for your time today. See you all next week, Thursday, at the same time and same place, using the same link, for the second of our 3 pre-launch Civil Designer version 8.4 webinars. Remember that the launch date of this version is Monday, the 3rd of August. Have a great afternoon, weekend, and goodbye for now.